I recently saw something where someone showed a completely different art direction leading with photography using AI, and it looked really cool. And being able to show that, like, is a way of communicate in a much better way. So I think it's interesting. And I think vendors, AI is the first question that comes up now in terms of like software. I think we'll see that more and more.
You're listening to Inside Commerce, a weekly e-com strategy, technology and CX focused podcast hosted by experienced digital consultants and replatform specialists James Gedd and Paul Rogers. Get insights into e-com strategy of leading brands, hear from industry thought leaders and leading tech vendors with practical advice to help you improve your online CX. This episode is sponsored by Shopify. We are returning back to what was the genesis of this entire podcast before we rebranded to Inside Commerce, which is around replatforming and managing projects, running projects. The reason we're doing it now is that it's been relatively quiet on the replatforming front for the past 12 to 18 months. The cadence of projects has been slower. There have been fewer big projects in the works. There have been fewer like legacy business migrations. And this is, Paul and I talk about this a lot. Obviously, because it's part and parcel of the service we provide. So we're obviously very keen to see what happening in the market. Also, lots of other people we know, agency side, consultancy side. It doesn't mean things have stopped. It's just that the volume of new projects coming in has slowed down. And we're starting to see that's picking up a bit more. So we wanted to look through about like what has changed, what's evolved, how do you run projects nowadays? What are some of the things you can do to make projects more efficient? I guess to help people plan, understand better how to deliver them. That was my rambling summary, Paul. Anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think as you rightfully point out, I think this is probably a bit of a peak as well in the replatforming world, where people start to think about starting projects in January. Start to think about launching pre-peak next year. It's just kind of mapping out the best way to approach those projects and kind of de-risking those types of projects.
Why do you think we're starting to see a bit? I know, seasonality. A lot of people are coming into new financial years next year. They're looking at the CapEx commitments, and that has an impact. But this time last year, I didn't see as much coming through. I'm seeing not just like your classic, what I'm going to call like the SaaS brands, people who will go to a likes of a Shopify, a Centra, a Ecommerce, but I'm seeing some more complex businesses with, more behind the scenes complexity and legacy stuff going on that are starting to consider this as well. So why do you think that is happening? What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
So I think there's a few reasons. So I think one would probably be the amount of people now on the SaaS platforms and like maybe the speed at which those businesses are moving. So I think some of the brands that I've spoke to are probably one of the main drivers is just kind of, them having this huge kind of backlog of projects that they've not been able to start. Their competitors being on one of these more kind of agile platforms, and kind of seeing the speed that they're moving. I think that's one. I think also just like industry trends around kind of given how many people are on these platforms now, and maybe there's some shifts in the industry around level of engineering resources needed and general kind of views on cost of these kind of infrastructure, like all of that kind of stuff. And then I also think over the last kind of 12 months, there's been a lot of uncertainty in a lot of different areas. So it feels like maybe quite a few people just skipped that time and maybe, renewed their license on a legacy provider or a different platform by 12 months. I definitely feel like I saw a few of those projects where people were kind of, at one point really focused on starting a project and then suddenly, the business has had other priorities. I also think not this time last year, but I think the tariffs paused a lot of stuff as well. And I think some of those projects are starting to happen again. And I think the other thing is maybe like, to be honest, I think as much as we're obviously agnostic and, there's so many different players, I also think that Shopify is probably at a point now where quite a few people have just been waiting to feel comfortable that they can actually service complex retailers. And I think that's probably part of it as well, regardless of whether they actually end up moving to Shopify or not. I feel like there's probably been some people that have just wanted to wait Yeah, and again, part of that would be because of the competition in their market, or just, the marketing around Shopify or whatever else. But yeah, probably a combination of all of those. Any others that you think?
No, I think that's absolutely spot on. And I think the reality is that Shopify is incredibly noisy in terms of its market. I'm not meaning it critically, but they are really on it. They are one of the most proactive in terms of how they invest in their marketing, how they build out their go-to-market stuff. And there's been a huge amount of information that's come out from them about how they are the best, how they are the best cost model. And there's been, quite rightly, a level of skepticism, because you should always be skeptical about claims and you should look to validate it. But you're right. The point you made about there are more case studies now demonstrating beyond simple mass market, direct to consumer, retail, e-commerce. You've got like the World of Books, for example, going live. Things like that where you go, oh, millions and millions of SKUs, like massive two-way data flows for stock and pricing updates on a massive enterprise level. That starts to change the dynamic. And I think you're right. That's probably starting to make people think we should be looking at this now. And even if the decision is, no, we're okay, but I think it's forcing people to be more proactive into looking and considering now.
Yeah, absolutely.
But let's look at before we get into our views on how you run these projects and what's changed. Let's look at, I wanted to talk about in the market, in the technology space, and in terms of delivery, what has changed in the last 12 months, 24 months. That's having an impact in terms of, I guess, how people look at tech, what tech they look at, what they're thinking about in their project beyond just let me replace my platform. Because for me, it's really moved from, I want to replace, pick your platform, Salesforce, Shopify, Adobe to Salesforce, anyone to Adobe, and it doesn't matter. Yeah. But the discussions now aren't and shouldn't be, I want to change my platform. It's about what impact is moving platform going to have on my ecosystem, and what do I need to invest in to get the most out of that? So I'm seeing a lot more change, not just in the agency consultancy side talking about, but in the client side, understanding that and realizing that there is an adaptive process here, and that actually there's a wider implication. It might mean greater change than just the e-com platform. I think that's the primary thing that I'm seeing difference. That there's a greater maturity of understanding developing amongst client side teams.
Yeah, completely agree with that. I completely agree. I also think there's a lot more, and I don't know if you agree with this, but I think 2 years ago there was a lot less platform to merchant direct communication. And I think now there is a lot more dialogue and connection between, be that at industry events, be that at private events, whatever else. I think there's a lot more of a direct relationship there. I still think, another thing that I think is, I still see TCO and cost reduction as like the main driver behind these projects, like 75% of the time. I think in the end, I think that's the main kind of, or at least the biggest component of a business case. And then alongside that, you've got any additional value that can come from it. And, often a board will want to see projections of uplift against certain KPIs and everything else. But I still think, I just wanted to say that just based on what you said, because I think I see both of those things, but I still think that like cost and OPEX reduction is still the big kind of motivating factor on a lot of these projects.
What do Mattel, Victoria Beckham, Sennheiser, and Glossier all have in common? They power their businesses with Shopify. Shopify is the most innovative and scaled commerce platform on the planet. It also happens to have the best converting checkout on the planet. Shopify, powering the future of enterprise commerce. Find out more at shopify.com/enterprise.
Yeah, I find it interesting. I agree, and it always should be, and every CFO out there should be pushing for what is the cost efficiency. But what I'm seeing is I still think there is a lack of understanding that change might not deliver you a positive ROI as quickly as you expect because of, let's look at the dependency. So yes, you can quickly cut license fees depending on what legacy high license version you might be on, but you might be in a world where you're on an open source non-license fee, and you'll switch into an ecosystem which has a platform license fee. And if you're at 100 million plus, that's a significant chunk you just added into your cost base. I still find that understanding of the nuances of cost model and reduction of cost versus investment and optimization of where you spend your money and the return you get from it and value versus cost. I still think people don't get it enough, because it's hard. Some use cases, it's very easy to go, we can save money, and others, it's actually harder because you've got other issues that where the money that you're reducing needs to be reinvested because of challenges you got, whether that's plug-in resource gaps or it's adding third parties because you just can't deliver stuff in the roadmap.
Completely agree. And I think I've seen many brand, or I've had many a conversation where I've been speaking to someone and they'll say this platform, is significantly more expensive than what I'm paying now, or, same price, whatever else, that they're on an open source platform with no license fee. They've got like a, terrible payment provider. There's really low cost, but it's also just not a brilliant service. Maybe there's fundamental issues in that service as well. And yet, as you say, there's so much more value from like in every commercial aspect to a more modern approach. And actually often it's just a hard comparison. I mean, even the modern comparisons now, I think both of us would say the two platforms we're comparing most are Centra and Shopify. And even with that, there's just a lot of variables and it's still complex, even if people, even just the payments piece alone. And I think a lot of people, there's a lot of room for like misconception there, basically.
Oh, I think fundamentally there is. And I'll give one really good tangible example where you can actually add cost to your project, which makes your project TCO look less favorable, but you're actually taking out cost and improving efficiency somewhere else, but that's accounted for in a different budget. So I was having a conversation today about post-order editing, and we know in the Shopify space, order editing, Hamish and team are smashing out the park, doing a brilliant job. So many brands onboarded. Order editing exists in other ecosystems, and not quite simple to set up and install, of course. But you're adding costs because you're either adding cut. So if you use an order editing the app in the Shopify world, you're adding app license fees and some. There's probably some. Potentially, in some cases, you might need to do a little bit of ERP work to support it. You might not. If you're doing it in another environment, you're probably doing custom coding, and that's going to add money. But you're stripping cost out of customer services because they're not having to field all these inquiries. You're potentially getting greater conversion or rate because people are happier. They've got exactly what they want. They can edit their order. They don't get frustrated. They don't cancel. You've got all these other shifts in cost and benefit that aren't modeled at a project level, unless you get into the granularity of it. So I think I still believe that this is an area that people haven't adapted their thinking enough to.
Yeah, and there's so many of those as well.
Yeah, it's like headless. Headless is really expensive. But actually, yes, so they might introduce additional costs somewhere, but it's going to improve capabilities in other areas. And maybe it's going to save you time and effort because you've got sort of a headless CMS in the central world. You've now got much greater granularity of control over publishing workflows. Well, actually, that's probably saved you loads of manual effort and might have improved the efficiency of the publish. Then you're like, well, okay, so there's pros and cons. And yeah, it's nuanced.
Exactly. And then I think one of the other variables, so this isn't in your list here, but I think one of the other variables in the ecosystem. So I think we talked about how loud Shopify is and kind of dominant from a kind of community and ecosystem perspective. I think one other thing that's had quite a big impact is that I would say a high proportion of the agencies that were selling against Shopify, so largely the Adobe, BigCommerce and Salesforce agencies, are now also selling Shopify, and I think a lot of that is because there's like critical mass in the Shopify world, but I think that's also having quite a big impact on things personally. Like, there's not that many voices anymore because there's not the volume outside of Centra, I would say, and I think we both agree on that. But I think a lot of the agency or like, the little kind of ecosystems would have been still pushing Salesforce, Adobe, BigCommerce, Commerce Layer, Commerce Tools. I feel like a lot of those are now actually in the Shopify camp as well. And I think that's having a bit of an impact.
Yeah, it is. And we know that some of those are deliberately done that because they want to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Even if they don't believe that Shopify is right for many projects, which it isn't. You know, it's a brilliant platform, but no platform's perfect for every use case. Actually, having the badge on your website can be the difference between being talked to and not being talked to. And at the early stage, that's huge.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah.
Let's look at the other thing that I'm seeing that's a bit different at the moment is timelines. And I'm going to speak away from large, complex businesses, like, you know, high-end manufacturing and B2B. But I definitely think that the way that the growth of platforms like Shopify, Centra, BigCommerce as well, and the standardization, I think, of middleware as part of a solution rather than we need to use middleware, do we? Now it's more like, what middleware are we using? You know, Patchwork's well embedded in the Shopify ecosystem and it's used outside of that. High Cohesion's doing really well. There's loads of them. There's a load of middlewares depending on where you are in the world. But I think that it just feels that the middlewares have built out their capabilities quite quickly. The number of like connectors and pre-existing like basic flows that speeds up adoption for integration cycles is just way better now. And then actually the time to market's coming down as a result.
Yeah.
So, you know, you've probably shaved a few months off of projects and it's not just the middleware there. It's also platform capabilities and automation and low no-code tooling, but definitely feels like going to market quicker is feasible for more people now.
Yeah, completely agree. I think the integrations piece, you know, back 6, 7, 8 years ago when we would be involved in project, that would have been the more complex thing to manage. And now, it feels like the barrier to entry and the amount of work there has come down a lot. And the same applies to data migration to a certain extent as well. I think that's got a lot simpler, and people are a lot kind of better at it as well. I mean, I think, you know, you see pretty big brands moving in weeks, and whether or not it's the right, I think the big question mark, and we could probably do an episode on this easily between ourselves, is the pros and cons, because I've also seen a lot of brands that have moved in 6-8 weeks when actually, you know, the cost would have been very similar if they moved in, you know, 6 months, and then they would have been able to go for a full redesign process and, you know, put a lot more rationale behind decisions and put a lot more time into like vendor selection and everything else and actually get more value. And I think often people kind of create their own reasoning for that, or there's someone senior in the business that's driving it and there's not enough time put into counter arguments. But I actually think we see that so often, and, you know, at least 50% of the time the need isn't, like, it's not that big a need to move that quickly. But I completely agree. Like, I think timelines, are pretty crazy now. I spoke to a few people recently that want to move this year, and they're only now starting to look at the project. And I think, as you rightfully said earlier, like, there's usually room to bring some value to a business in this project, but in order to do that, you need time.
Yeah, and actually, interestingly, having said that, the overall project timelines are condensing. So, I mean, 6 to 9 months for a Shopify BigCommerce, a non-legacy vendor has been pretty common.
Yeah.
But 4 to 6 months in terms of development time, including full development, UAT, QA, UAT, the whole thing to be ready, 4 to 6 months now is the average I'm working on. But what I am seeing, which I'm really grateful for, and maybe I'm just lucky with who I'm working with, but a greater investment in discovery. So I see the agencies in that space maturing. So if you go to like legacy vendors, the like big Adobe projects, Salesforce is what used to be IBM, all of those are on Tybrus's. Long detailed discovery was just standard. It wasn't a 2 to 3 week discovery.
Discovery.
Yeah, exactly. Let's solve things in build phase. That it was so risk averse, and actually there's a lot of benefit there, especially at enterprise level. But now I'm now seeing what was 2 to 4 week discoveries being 6 to 8 weeks. More spent on it, clients invested in it, more people involved, greater depth of technical assessment, and greater level of speccing out solutions and doing proper due diligence.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's an interesting discussion as well. I think where it's needed, I think that's really valuable. But I think a lot of it depends on the teams as well, because the hardest thing about discovery, in my opinion, or a lot of the time, especially if you've got, you know, a consultant in there as well and everything else, is calendars. And I think I have done some project for Oka was a good example where that was a relatively short discovery, but the hours were in it. It was just kind of everything kind of aligned, and it was planned quite well. That time was ring fenced on both sides. But I think, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with your point. I think you can't rush discovery, and there's always going to be benefit from being more thorough, and obviously less risk. Yeah, it's just interesting, like with how the timings around these projects have changed, and yeah, like I mean, I think it varies basically, and like yeah.
It does. I just think I see on average, and I guess we work with different portfolio people, but I see on average more time spent. I see agencies being more structured and disciplined.
Definitely.
In discovery. If I go back 5 years, the agencies needed a lot more hand-holding and cajoling, not because they didn't want to do a good job, because they didn't have the project delivery expertise in-house. They sharpened that up. They've got more senior people, and the quality and depth of analysis and input is far higher. I just think the ecosystems are maturing, basically.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah, and I definitely think, I mean, historically, we would have done projects where we would have driven a lot of that kind of stuff, and I think that's probably needed less and less. But I do also think the projects are getting simpler, and like the technologies are getting simpler as well. So it's, yeah, kind of coming from both sides.
It is. Let's riff on that, because I think that's a good point. Is there are certain things, whereas you would have spent a lot more time working on like storefront design piece. Well, actually, if you're taking a modern SaaS platform with a theme, there's loads of stuff that you're not having to spend as much time. Like accessibility, right? Yes, you have to think about it, but core accessibility is baked in. Mobile first, yes, you got design like that, but actually from a templating and a code based point of view. So there's a lot of stuff where you used to spend a lot more technical time defining, making sure it was understood what it meant. And now you don't need to. That actually the bits I see more time being spent on, which is the value add, is things like product data model and architecture, where that can be the difference between having a site where you can sell and having a site where it's bloody easy to find stuff. Search and product discovery work effectively well. Filtering is nailed down. Your structured data from an SEO point of view, and also now from AI agent point of view is improved. And it just feels like there's that more time shifting to value add tasks.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I think the other one, historically, I think most of the projects, again, both of us probably would have worked on, would have been like, you know, this is your scope, and, you know, things are being pushed to fast follow all the way through. Whereas now it feels like, you know, you get some pretty meaty additional net new functionality in some of these projects. Like loyalty has been a big one that we've had across a few more projects recently, new markets, all that kind of stuff. And I think, a lot of that is just how the amount of time in different areas has changed, I guess. But yeah, I completely agree. There's almost like, there is like almost like a standard approach in certain platforms to check out. Yeah, as you say, I think it depends on the agency, but I think accessibility is one that you don't need to put the same level of effort into anymore. And I can't remember the other thing you said, but there's loads of those areas. And I mean, ultimately what we're saying is I do think the level of resistance and the amount of complexity in these projects is coming down, and it just allows you to put the time into the things that are actually going to have an impact on the business.
Let's go into like the discovery phase, because we talk a lot about this. We both get involved. We either run it or we support on lots of discoveries. And I guess things always change. Like this, the core principles of running a discovery are always going to be the same. The fact that you need to know what the scope is. You need to know what your goals are. You need to know all the capability areas you've got to capture info. You need to know who gets involved, struct, blah, 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 blah. We've already done this in the past. Let's talk about some interesting areas, because you made a comment earlier about how people need to be prepared, what they need to do now to speed up discovery, to de-risk. Do you want to talk people through that? Like, what are the things that client teams can and should be doing ahead of starting the discovery?
Yeah, I think, again, a lot of this will depend, but I think it's more the things that can be done that can help to reduce risk, speed up discovery, get more from discovery. And I think all of the kind of core documentation would be one obvious thing. So like systems diagrams, kind of definition around roles and responsibilities, stakeholder mapping, like organization of like steerco and that whole thing. I think for me, the types of projects we work on, again, some of this might be down to the types of clients we work with, which is largely premium fashion and kind of lifestyle brands. But the creative side of the project and the design elements of the project are the things that bring a lot of the risk around timeline. And that can just be a nightmare. And there's a lot of room for, really vocal stakeholders to change their mind throughout the project and, for sessions to not be ran too efficiently. So one thing that we've done in the past is in kind of parallel to some of the kind of upfront functional discovery to like enable agencies to be able to provide an accurate timeline and quote. We've also done some sessions on the creative side and just basically started trying to manage some of those stakeholders early on and kind of trying to feed information to them, trying to extract information from them, start to kind of get some level of documentation against key areas of the site on what these stakeholders are looking to achieve, examples from them, everything else. And then basically just try to get to a point where there's less risk going into those sessions and the design process can take 10 weeks instead of 16 weeks. I think that would be a good one. I think an equivalent around integration. I mean, to be honest, any area of risk in the project, I think if you've got time and you've got parallel streams of work happening, the more kind of discussion you can have beforehand and the more kind of definition you can get together, even if you're not making final decisions, but just like kind of, pre-reading for agency stakeholders, pre-discussion around, things like payments or, kind of anything else that can have an impact on the project. I think it's just, and the other thing would be like pulling out anything that could impact timelines and even like resource planning as well internally, just anything you can do to just make that discovery easier and make it easier to kind of manage resources for whoever's kind of taken the lead at the highest level.
Yeah, I think there are two things that as a independent consultant, I think add a lot of value to help, because my role is basically, it's like the babble fish. I sit between the agency and the client. I help them be as efficient as they possibly can together, rather than getting in the way, which is not what a good consultant should ever do. But the first bit is basically prior to engaging with agency for any discovery is sitting down with the client and being very concise about scope, what has to be delivered and what isn't, looking at the to be, the issues, what they like, the frustrations, where they want to get, like what they want to achieve, what's in their roadmap, what have they not been able to ship on the client, all of these stuff, and to just probe in a positive way and say, but do you really need that? Is that important? What's going, and get to the point of being very succinct about what has to be there on day one for MVP and what is a nice to have luxury, but what, we don't have a business proposition for it, a business case for it, and other stuff, which is we need to deliver it, but it doesn't have to be. I think the more succinct you can be on that, the easier it is for an agency to focus on where the importance is in discovery. And it doesn't mean you don't have to have the other conversations, but you can it's almost like discovery 1A, 1B. Yeah. A is the priorities, B can come later because you don't have to ship it. Therefore, the sign off for discovery and the cost model and stuff doesn't have to be predicated on it. Don't get in the way. Get streams like integrations going early. Anything that's not impacting those key streams, you can then pick up and a follow up and then fold that back into the project depending on availability, cost, timeline. That's one thing that works really well. The other bit is definitely the supporting getting ready for each session by working with the agency to get a very succinct set of questions that they've got to answer and helping them by saying you might also answer this, and then working the business teams to get data and insights so that the agency has stuff at least ideally a week before the workshop, because you can suddenly go from this in a workshop to this, and then this gets more detail.
Yeah, completely agree with both of them.
And they're fun as well, aren't they? Because it's good because you're helping people speed up decision making. Have you Is there anything else that you've noticed in discoveries? Is anything changing the way people are delivering them, running them, the techniques, the tools?
I think it depends. A lot of it depends on the scope of the project and the goals of the project. Like, I think most of the projects we work on are relatively tight timeline, and the main goal is to migrate over to a new tech stack as effectively as possible, and usually like elevate the brand and like, you know, improve the front end. I think where you've got every now and then when we've worked on like bigger, more complex, broader projects, I think, you know, there's a lot more room for like broader kind of Miro board type sessions around kind of different ideas around how to like architect things. But I mean, to be honest, I don't feel like ours have changed that much in recent times, working across different agencies. I think maybe the only other thing would be I think the agencies we work with, some of them have really leveled up maybe on the design side in terms of like using real customer data, doing customer surveys, like some of that kind of stuff. More around how they kind of map out different journeys. I think the other thing would be Figma actually makes some not necessarily functional discovery, but I think prototyping is something that helps a lot in terms of the design phase and getting people comfortable with certain kind of interaction design, and then also kind of seeing different journeys firsthand. But beyond that, I feel like a lot of it's still very similar to me. But that being said, I'm probably not as close to some of the ones we've ran recently as I used to be.
Yeah, the wireframing, it's definitely something that's a good value add to discovery, because you're not in design yet, but you want to be able to, you want to understand the structural impact of technical decisions. So I just, in a recent one where we had like 3 or 4 different PDP specifications because of the different product data models, having that as a basic wireframe to show what that meaningfully means. The difference in a room when you've got multiple of stakeholders to see that, rather than somebody technical conceptually talking through a data model. So way better. I don't see, I think what I see a bit more of is, a bit more, what I see as a key difference is fewer massive sessions. I remember years back, all day, and I was guilty of this. I used to run all day sessions, broke up into small breaks in between. But actually, do you know what? It's a really, really shit use of time because you're too tired. And if you've got a product data architecture one at 3 p.m. after being in meetings for 5-6 hours, your brain's like. So I'm seeing days focused generally onto a specific topic with a maybe 2 hour. Yeah. With time for like discussion afterwards, and then more agile follow up of, okay, we've got 8 questions to resolve, and this is the process of doing it. We need another call on this, and we might need documentation on this, and being a little bit more flexible in how you capture the data rather than in a room all day long.
Yeah, I think I've seen that as well, to be honest. Yeah, probably. I think some of that is actually, and I don't know if you agree with this, but I think some of it is also working with Shopify. Like, I feel like I've always kind of seen Shopify as more like broken down into chunks, whereas I think with some of the other platforms, and again, maybe that's not fair, maybe it's changed a bit more, but I think back in the Adobe days, it would be full on, kind of, full day sessions. There would be a lot more nuance, and as you say, like, I think there would be a lot more kind of openness in different areas that would kind of extend a lot of those sessions. And also there'd probably be a bit more nervousness around scope creep as well, just because there's less standardization. And also you've got the back end side of things as well.
Yeah, I think it's a fair thing to say that legacy implementations, which were more complex and technically challenging, and also a lot of those were in larger businesses with more teams and more like diverse teams, and it ended up being get everyone together to talk about it. In hindsight, wasn't the most effective use of time, but I totally get why. I was at House of Fraser in 2015 when we went through this process. I totally get why it was done in that way. But also the big the big shift now is post-COVID, people have got used to working remotely and realizing that you can deliver work effectively and you don't have to all be in an office all day long to go through all the workshops, because that's the only time you can get your calendars aligned. Because trying to get people for 1 hour, 2 hour sessions all in an office across multiple days doesn't work, right? So that's why I used to do one day. We're all in on Tuesday, we'll all do it all day long. But actually now people know, do it on Teams, do it, whatever it is. You've got AI transcript writers and note takers. You've got session recordings, the ability to do that remotely, do critical ones where you really need some brain power and some like to and fro and disagreement and discussion and whiteboarding stuff out, that in person, but everything else can be done remotely.
Yeah, I agree.
One other kind of discussion point I wanted to go into is about, I definitely see replatforming now not about change your platform, but about evolve your ecosystem. And that is more of a strategic lens on technology selection, because if you change, whatever it might be, Adobe to Shopify, Salesforce to a BigCommerce, or a BigCommerce to a Salesforce, whatever the path you're going is, it's going to have an impact on the other third parties you're using, because each platform has its strong connectors, right? It has the tools that it's really well integrated with to enable all the data flows you're on, versus ones where you have to do a lot of configuration or custom development to get all the functionality working. So I see this more now as an ecosystem play, and this being a big shift in how people need to be educated and brought into the project to understand that just because a platform is changing and it's not their part of the business, that actually their part of the business, there could be a dependency and an impact on the tech that they're using.
Yeah, I agree. I guess this varies a bit as well. Like, I think some of the bigger projects we work on, there might be slightly less room to, discuss certain things. So like a lot of projects we've worked on recently have had a PIM involved. I think in a lot of cases, there's not as much need for a PIM these days. I think it's very rare recently that we've done a project where the only additional, basically less people are looking at some of those kind of isolated, like specialist PIM products. And maybe the only time it is being looked at as net new is more Airtable, and it's more an efficiency play, or the team are particularly comfortable with Airtable, but it's not necessarily due to, I guess if it's like proper multi-channel implementation and you're passing data between other systems, I guess we've just not really had a project where there's been a net new need for PIM.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of PIM, I see this as well. And the main reason is, outside of complex use cases where you might have huge numbers of translations, multiple storefronts, different views of catalog and product for different audience types, that actually the e-com native product models have got much deeper and better. So with meta fields, data fields, custom fields, extensions, you can actually build out a really robust data model now. And you can do that through bulk imports, and you can manage it through bulk edits. So there are, I think, some of the use cases where a PIM was really helpful 3-5 years ago, it was not so needed. But then there are always ones where trying to do it through e-com is just too convoluted. The data model's too complex for you to be able to do like bulk editing in any efficient way. But the other main change I'm seeing in the way that people approach these projects now is it's inevitable. It's focus on AI and demanding of the platforms and the agencies. How is AI being used to improve automation, to reduce manual effort, to strip unnecessary cost out and allow efficiency? I don't know how key you're finding these discussions, but I hear this more and more of, to an agency. So how are you in the RFP status? How are you using AI to improve like your code management, your testing? And then that obviously has an influence in terms of who they select for the project, and then in terms of how the project is run.
Yeah, I think we haven't really seen that come up a load, but the only reason I think is because, however, like the last few projects we've worked on, I think there's probably been a bit more like the agencies are quite familiar. I think the agencies talk a bit about that, but I think most of the projects we've done, the focus has been really on the front end of the site, and it's more about demonstrating like the quality of the front end experience, and from an AI perspective, maybe more around kind of how they prototype, how they can, like illustrate how different photography could work, and like create kind of, I would say it's more basically where I've seen agencies talk around AI. It's been more the design and creative side. But that being said, I think, like I said, I just don't think I've worked with a brand where there's been like an RFP of like kind of completely new agencies for quite a while. It feels like there's been a lot of familiarity between, agencies and stakeholders and stuff. So it's not been like completely not new for a while. But yeah, I think I do agree though. There's a lot of value that can be, there's a lot of value there. And I think that is something that agencies should be leaning into. And you see on LinkedIn, like you see agencies talking about how they're using AI in different areas. And to be honest, that creative side, I have definitely seen some really cool stuff. Like I recently saw something where someone basically showed a completely different art direction leading with photography using AI, and it did look really cool. And being able to show that is just a way of, communicating something in a much better way. So yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think we'll probably see. I think vendors, AI is like the first question that comes up now, like in terms of like software. But I think agencies, I think we'll see that more and more. And
yes, indeed. So let's wrap this up on our, we love doing these kind of like rambling episodes with a loose structure, talking about what we're seeing and how things are changing. But I think my summary would be there's an approach shift from like big bang relaunches to a bit more like modular, incremental. Getting speed to market is important, getting to market light, but being able to roll stuff out quicker afterwards. We are seeing technology shift, and composability is definitely the leading strategy going forward, whatever that means in terms of like the tech stack that's built out. But as a strategic approach, that is fundamentally the right one, because it's about flexibility in your tech stack. And then we talked about the fact that discovery is timelines of projects might be shrinking, but in some cases more time is being spent in discovery because of that, to get into more detail and have a better, stronger spec before you hit the build phase. I guess those are the overall summaries. Anything else you want to add to that?
Don't think so. No, I think that's a good summary. And I think, we covered loads of interesting points. I think, as we kind of pointed out all the way through, I think just quite a few areas are getting simplified now, and the areas where you can add value, are just more important, and there's more room to, kind of bring that value in those areas.
Yeah, I think this is it. Adding value, focusing on where you add value and where you spend your money. Well, that brings us to an end. I hope people have enjoyed listening. Anything that piqued your interest you want to chat to us about, do reach out. Anything where you think we talked utter nonsense, do challenge us on it. We always love to be challenged. Until next week, everyone. You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast, hosted by experienced consultants James Gerd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-commerce strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode.